At my son's graduation from McGill University, he stood on the stage as the valedictorian, the golden boy of the class of 2024. He looked out at 2,000 people and gave a speech about success, about vision, and about the people who made him who he is. I sat in the front row, clutching the program so hard my knuckles turned white, waiting for my name. I was the one who worked double shifts in freezing underground tunnels to pay his $55,000 tuition. I was the one with the electrical burns on my arms and the permanent limp from a fall on a job site. But when Brandon leaned into the microphone, he didn't look at me. He looked past me straight at his stepfather, Richard. He said, "Richard, you are the father who truly invested in my future. You taught me that image is everything. I wouldn't be standing here without you." He never mentioned me once, not one single word. So I did something that shocked the entire auditorium. I didn't cry, I didn't make a scene. I simply stood up while he was still speaking, let my heavy work boots slam against the floor, and walked out the emergency exit. But when his six-figure dream job vanished, and he came begging for the trust fund I had saved for 40 years, he found out that the Bank of Dad had permanently closed its doors. If you have ever been the one to pay the bill only to have someone else take the credit, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. It helps me feel a little less alone in this story. The air inside the McGill University fieldhouse was thick, smelling of floor wax, stale popcorn, and too much expensive perfume. It was sweltering hot, the kind of heat that makes a cheap suit stick to your back. And my suit was definitely cheap. It was a charcoal gray number I had bought off the rack at a department store in Boston 10 years ago for a cousin's funeral. The collar was too tight, choking me, reminding me with every breath that I didn't belong here. I am Thomas Sterling, 70 years old, a retired master electrician from South Boston. I have spent my entire life in work boots, denim, and high-visibility vests. Sitting there in that folding metal chair squeezed between people who looked like they owned sailboats and summer homes in the Hamptons, I felt like a rough stone in a bag of polished diamonds. But I didn't care about the heat or the suit. I was floating on pride. Pure, unadulterated pride. My boy Brandon was up there on the stage. My son. The kid who used to hold the flashlight for me when I fixed the wiring in our basement was now the valedictorian of one of the most prestigious universities in North America. I looked down at my hands resting on my knees. They are ugly hands, thick, calloused, scarred from decades of pulling cable, stripping wire, and taking shocks that would knock a lesser man out cold. There is a burn scar on my left forearm that runs from my wrist to my elbow, a souvenir from a transformer explosion in '98 that nearly killed me. I remember that night vividly. I was working a triple shift during a blizzard because tuition prices were going up, and I wanted to make sure Brandon's college fund stayed ahead of inflation. That fund. That was my life's work. $220,000 over 4 years. That is what it cost to get him to this stage. I didn't take out loans. I didn't ask for financial aid. I paid every single cent out of my pocket. I drove a truck with 300,000 miles on it so he could drive a decent sedan. I ate sandwiches from gas stations so he could have a meal plan. I haven't taken a vacation since 2004. But looking at him now, adjusting his cap and gown, looking so confident and sharp, I told myself it was worth every drop of sweat. It was worth every missed holiday. I had built a foundation so he could build a skyscraper. I glanced to my right. 3 seats away sat my ex-wife Diane and her husband Richard. They looked like they belonged on the cover of a magazine. Richard was wearing a navy Italian suit that probably cost more than my truck. He was tanned, manicured, and smiling that oily, self-satisfied smile of his. He worked in finance or consulting or wealth management. I never really understood what he actually did, except that it involved talking a lot and producing nothing you could hold in your hands. He had come into Brandon's life when the boy was 15, dazzling him with leased luxury cars and weekends at golf resorts. Diane whispered something in Richard's ear and giggled like a schoolgirl. They didn't look at me. To them, I was just part of the furniture, a necessary inconvenience, the wallet that opened up when the bills came due. The dean introduced Brandon, and the applause was thunderous. I clapped the loudest, my rough hands making a sharp, cracking sound. Brandon stepped to the podium. He looked handsome. He looked smart. He looked like everything I wasn't. He cleared his throat and began to speak. His voice was smooth, polished, devoid of the Boston accent I had never been able to shake. He talked about the challenges of the modern world. He talked about resilience. He talked about the future of economics. I sat there, leaning forward, waiting. Every graduate thanks their parents. It is the standard script. I was ready to wipe a tear from my eye. I was ready to nod humbly. Then he shifted his weight and smiled toward our section. And now, he said, his voice dropping an octave to sound sincere, I need to thank the people who made this possible. Success is not a solo journey. It is crafted by those who guide us. My heart hammered against my ribs. Here it comes, I thought. First to my mother, Diane, he said, thank you for your unwavering belief in me. Diane blew him a kiss, dabbing at her dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. And Brandon continued, taking a dramatic pause. I want to give a special thank you to the man who stepped up, the man who showed me what it truly means to be successful. I sat up straighter. I prepared to smile. To my stepfather, Richard, Brandon announced, his voice booming through the speakers. Richard, you didn't have to take me on, but you did. You taught me that we are not defined by where we come from, but by where we are going. You taught me that style, presentation, and networking are the keys to the kingdom. You invested your time, your wisdom, and your vision in me. You showed me how to walk into a room and own it. I am the man I am today because of you. I wouldn't be standing on this stage without your guidance. Thank you, Dad. The word hung in the air like toxic smoke. Dad. He called him Dad. The applause started again, polite and enthusiastic. Richard stood up, buttoning his jacket with a flourish, and waved to the crowd as if he had just been elected president. He pointed at Brandon with 2 fingers, a cool, slick gesture. I sat frozen. The blood drained from my face, leaving me cold, despite the suffocating heat of the room. My ears were ringing. I waited for the and. I waited for and to my biological father, Thomas, for working himself into an early grave to pay for this degree. But the and never came. Brandon turned back to his notes and moved on to a quote by Elon Musk. He had erased me. In front of 2,000 people in the most important moment of his life, he had wiped me out of existence. The hours in the tunnels, the burns, the weekends spent fixing neighbors' wiring for extra cash. The check I wrote every semester for $55,000. It meant nothing. To him, my contribution was just a biological function and a bank transfer. Richard, who hadn't paid a dime, who had never changed a diaper or sat up with him through a fever, was the hero because he taught him how to wear a suit and order expensive wine. A dark, heavy rage began to boil in my gut. It wasn't the hot, flashing anger of a bar fight. It was the cold, hard resolve of a man who realizes the job is over. I looked at my hands again. The scars looked deeper now. They looked ugly. Brandon was ashamed of these hands. He was ashamed of the sweat that paid for his gown. I didn't think, I just moved. I pushed my metal folding chair back. It scraped against the gymnasium floor with a loud, high-pitched screech that cut right through Brandon's speech about innovation. Several heads in the rows in front of me turned around, annoyed. I stood up to my full height. I am a big man, broad-shouldered from 50 years of manual labor. I blocked the view for the people behind me. I didn't say, "Excuse me." I stepped into the aisle. The auditorium was designed to amplify sound, and my heavy work boots, the only pair of shoes I felt comfortable in, made a dull, rhythmic thud against the wooden floorboards of the aisle. Thud, thud, thud. On stage, Brandon faltered. He stopped speaking mid-sentence. He looked down and saw me. Our eyes locked. I saw confusion in his face, then a flash of embarrassment. He looked quickly at Richard, then back at me. I didn't frown. I didn't shake my head. I just looked at him with a face of stone. I turned my back on him. I walked up the long center aisle toward the back of the hall. The silence in the room was growing. The murmurs started. People were craning their necks to see the old man in the cheap gray suit walking out on the valedictorian. Sir, an usher whispered as I approached the doors. "Sir, you can't leave yet. The ceremony isn't over." I looked at the usher, a kid no older than Brandon. "My part is over, son," I said. My voice was loud enough to be heard by the back 5 rows. "The bill is paid." I pushed open the heavy metal emergency exit doors. The bar clanged loudly. Sunlight flooded into the dim hall, blindingly bright. I stepped out into the fresh air and let the heavy door slam shut behind me, cutting off the sound of my son's voice, cutting off the applause for Richard, cutting off the last 23 years of my life. I stood in the empty parking lot, took a deep breath of air that didn't smell of betrayal, and loosened my tie. It was done. But they didn't know yet just how done it really was. The asphalt of the parking lot was radiating heat like a skillet on a stovetop, burning through the soles of my boots as I walked fast toward the back row. I loosened the tie that felt like a noose around my neck and wiped the sweat from my forehead with the back of my hand. My truck was parked way in the back, a white 2010 Ford F-150 with a dent in the rear bumper and a heavy steel toolbox welded to the bed. It was not a pretty vehicle. It had rust spots on the wheel wells, and the paint was peeling on the hood, but it was paid for. It was honest. Just looking at it gave me a small measure of comfort after the circus inside that auditorium. I fumbled for my keys, my hands still shaking from the adrenaline of walking out. I just wanted to get on the highway. I just wanted to drive until the smell of expensive perfume and betrayal was out of my nose. Thomas. The shriek cut through the humid air like a circular saw hitting a nail. I did not have to turn around to know it was Diane. I knew that tone better than I knew my own heartbeat. It was the same tone she used when I came home with grease on my jeans after a 14-hour shift. It was the same tone she used when she told me 15 years ago that she was leaving me for a man with a better portfolio and softer hands. I unlocked the truck door hoping to slide in and start the engine before they reached me, but I was not fast enough. "Thomas Sterling, you turn around and look at me right now." I turned slowly. They were hurrying across the lot looking ridiculous in the heat. Diane was struggling in her high heels, her face flushed with rage, not exertion. Richard was trotting beside her, trying to maintain his cool composure, but sweating through his navy silk shirt. They stopped 10 feet from me, panting heavily. "You look like a maniac," Diane spat, her chest heaving. "What the hell is wrong with you walking out in the middle of the speech like that? You are making a scene, Thomas. You are embarrassing him on the most important day of his life." I leaned back against the warm metal of my truck and crossed my arms over my chest. I looked at this woman I had once built a house for with my own 2 hands. I did not see the woman I loved anymore. I saw a stranger with cruel eyes. "I did not embarrass him, Diane." I said, my voice low and steady. "He embarrassed himself. He stood up there and lied to 2,000 people. He erased his own father." Richard stepped forward, smoothing his lapels. He put on that pitying smile, the one he used on waiters and valets, the one that said he knew secrets about the world that you were too simple to understand. "Come on, Tom, do not be so small," he said, his voice smooth like oil on water. The boy was just giving credit where credit is due. "You have to admit I have polished him up. I gave him the connections. I gave him the look. I turned him into a gentleman." He gestured at my truck with a dismissive wave of his manicured hand. "Look at this, Tom. Look at what you drive. Look at your hands. They are rough. They are dirty. How is a boy like Brandon supposed to aspire to greatness when his father drives a beat-up work truck? You provided the funds, sure. but I provided the future. The funds. He called $220,000 the funds like it was loose change found in a sofa cushion. Something snapped in my chest. It was not a loud snap, just a quiet, final breaking of the last thread of patience I had. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My screen was cracked, but it worked fine. I opened my banking app. It took a second to load on the slow data connection. I scrolled back to the transfer history. I held the phone out, shoving it right into Richard's face so he had to step back. "Read it," I snarled. $220,000. That is the total over 4 years. Tuition, room, board, books. Every single dime came from this truck. It came from wiring houses in July attics where the temperature was 130 degrees. It came from frozen fingers in December trenches. Now you show me your phone, Richard. You show me the transaction history, where you paid for his future. Show me one check. Just one. Did you pay for his books? Did you buy his meal plan? Or are those suits you are wearing just rentals like everything else in your life? Richard did not pull out his phone. He just sneered and adjusted his cufflinks, looking at me like I was a bug he wanted to squash, but did not want to dirty his shoe. He did not have to answer, because Diane did it for him. She stepped between us, her eyes cold and hard as diamonds. "Put your phone away, Thomas," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You are being pathetic. Paying for college was your obligation. That is what biological fathers do. They pay the bills. That is your function. That is your only value." But Richard gave him a world you could not even dream of entering. Brandon belongs to Richard's world now. He is a Sterling by name, but he is a Finch by nature. After today, you are just a memory, Thomas. You have served your purpose. You are expired. Expired. The word hung in the humid air, heavy and suffocating. She looked at me not with hate, but with total indifference, like I was a broken toaster she was throwing in the trash. And in that moment the pain vanished. It was replaced by a clarity so sharp it cut. She was right. I had served my purpose. I had paid the bill. And now the contract was over. I did not yell. I did not curse. I just nodded slowly. "You are right, Diane," I said. "I am done." I opened the heavy door of the truck. The hinges creaked, a sound I used to hate but now sounded like music. I climbed into the cab. The seat was hot vinyl, but it fit me. I slammed the door shut, sealing myself inside my own world, a world of work and honesty. I put the key in the ignition and turned it. The engine roared to life with a rumble that shook the frame. It was a loud, unrefined sound, a working man's sound. Diane and Richard stepped back, wrinkling their noses at the exhaust fumes. I did not look at them. I shifted into drive and hit the gas. The tires kicked up a cloud of dust and gravel, coating Richard's shiny Italian shoes in a layer of gray grit. I watched them in the rearview mirror as they grew smaller and smaller, two little figures standing in the heat, thinking they had won. I muttered to the empty cab, my voice raspy but firm. "Fine. You want his world. You got it. Let us see how Richard's world feeds him when the check does not clear." The interstate stretched out before me like a gray ribbon cutting through the mountains of New Hampshire. Interstate 93 South. It is a long drive from Montreal back to Boston, 6 hours, if you are lucky with traffic, but today time seemed to stretch and warp. The only sound in the cab was the low hum of the tires on the asphalt and the rattle of my toolbox in the bed every time I hit a pothole. I kept the radio off. I did not want music. I did not want talk shows. I just wanted the silence to drown out the ringing in my ears, sumos from that auditorium. I gripped the steering wheel, feeling the worn leather under my calloused palms. These hands. Diane had hated these hands. I remembered the day she left 15 years ago. It was a Tuesday, raining just like it had been in my chest for months. She was standing in the hallway of the house I had wired myself, her suitcases packed by the door. She looked at me not with anger, but with a kind of exhausted disappointment that hurt worse than screaming. She had said, "Thomas, I am tired of the smell of ozone and sweat. I am tired of worrying about money. I want a life that looks good, not just one that works." She left because I was practical. She left because I was steady. And she ran straight to Richard, a man who was all flash and no foundation. I thought I had made peace with that years ago. I thought I was fine being the background character in her life as long as I could be the father to Brandon. But sitting in that truck, watching the mile markers blur past, I realized I had not been a father to him, not in his eyes. I had been an ATM machine, a utility. Just like the electricity running through the walls of a house, you only notice it when it stops working, or when the bill comes due. I drove for 3 hours in a trance. The sun began to dip, casting long shadows across the highway. I thought about the trust fund. $150,000. It was not inherited money. I did not have a rich uncle like Richard pretended to be. That money was blood. It was 40 years of skipping lunch. It was driving this truck until the wheels fell off instead of buying a new one. It was the profit from selling the first house I ever flipped money I had sworn I would not touch so that Brandon could have a seed to plant his own life. I had imagined giving it to him. I had played that scene in my head 1,000 times. I would hand him the check, maybe shake his hand and say, "Go build something real, son." Now that money felt like a lead weight sitting in the bank account. It felt like a joke. My phone buzzed against the passenger seat, vibrating against the vinyl. It was a sharp, intrusive sound in the quiet cab. I glanced over. The screen lit up. It was an email notification. I had blocked their numbers before I even left the parking lot, but I had forgotten to block the emails. The sender name was Brandon Sterling. I did not want to look. I knew it was going to be poison. But the curiosity that humans need to know just how deep the knife goes made me reach for it. I kept one hand on the wheel and picked up the phone. I held it up, squinting a little in the fading light. Subject: "You are pathetic." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I opened the message. "Dad," it read. Or should I say Thomas, because a real father does not walk out on his son. "You are absolutely pathetic. You tried to ruin my moment because your ego could not handle the truth. You want to talk about money. That is all you ever talk about. Well, guess what? I do not need your money. I do not need your little blue-collar contributions anymore. Doom Richard has secured me a position as an investment manager at Sterling and Finch. My starting salary is $120,000 a year. That is more than you made in your best years pulling wire. I am entering a world you do not understand, a world of real wealth. So keep your spare change. I do not want it. And do not contact me. Do not call. Do not write until you learn how to act like a gentleman and apologize to Richard for disrespecting him." I read it twice. Then I read it a third time. $120,000. Sterling and Finch. Richard got him the job. The words should have hurt. They should have torn me apart. And for a second they did. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the cab. My own son thought I was pathetic because I worked with my hands. He thought a salary he had not even earned yet made him better than me. But then something shifted. It was like a breaker tripping in my head, cutting the power to the part of me that was hurt, the part of me that was so. The heat in my chest cooled instantly. The grip on my heart loosened. He did not need me. He said it right there in black and white. He had Richard. He had a 6-figure job. He had a future secured by his stepfather's connections. He was safe. He was set. And I was free. I felt a strange light sensation wash over me. It was relief. For 23 years, I had been carrying the weight of his future on my back. I had been worrying, saving, scraping, terrified that I would not be able to provide enough. I had let Diane's insults and Richard's sneers slide off me because I thought I had to for Brandon. But Brandon had made his choice. He had chosen his father. He had chosen his investor. I looked at the road ahead. I saw a sign for a rest area 1 mile ahead. I put on my blinker. The clicking sound was steady, rhythmic calming. I steered the big truck off the highway and rolled into the parking lot. I pulled into a spot away from the other cars under a flickering street lamp. I put the truck in park, but left the engine running. The rumble of the diesel was my only company. I picked up the phone again. I did not reply to the email. There was nothing to say. You do not argue with a man who thinks he knows everything. You let life teach him. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I needed. Katz Leonard, attorney at law. Leonard was an old friend, a guy I had wired an office for 30 years ago. He was sharp, cynical, and the only lawyer I trusted. It was late, almost 7 in the evening, but I knew Leonard. He lived in his office. I pressed call. It rang 4 times. Hello, Leonard's gravelly voice came through the truck's speakers. Tom, it is late. Everything okay? I took a deep breath. The air in the cab tasted stale, but in my lungs it felt clean. I am fine, Leonard, I said. I am better than fine. I am driving back from Montreal. Montreal, Leonard grunted. The graduation. Right. How did it go? Is the boy a genius yet? He is something, I said, my voice flat. Listen, Leonard. I need you to do something for me. First thing tomorrow morning. There was a pause on the line. Leonard could hear the tone in my voice. He knew that tone. It was the tone I used when a contractor tried to stiff me on a job. What do you need, Tom? I looked out the windshield at the dark trees swaying in the wind. I thought about the $150,000 sitting in that trust account. I thought about Brandon in his cap and gown, thanking Richard. I thought about the email. Do not need your spare change. Leonard, prepare the paperwork. I said, my voice steady as a rock. I want to change the beneficiary on the trust fund. $150,000. I want it moved, immediately. The morning light filtering through the dust motes in Leonard Katz's office did nothing to warm the room. It was situated in a brick building in downtown Boston that smelled permanently of old paper, lemon furniture polish, and the kind of stale coffee that has been sitting on a burner since dawn. I sat in the leather client chair, the one with the crack in the left armrest that I had told Leonard to fix 5 years ago. My hands were resting on my knees, still vibrating slightly from the 6-hour drive back from Montreal. On the heavy oak desk between us lay a single manila folder. It was thin, unassuming, but it weighed $150,000. Leonard took off his reading glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked tired. We were both getting too old for this kind of drama. He sighed, a long, rattling sound that seemed to come from the depths of his chest. Tom, he said, his voice rough, you need to think about this. You are running on adrenaline and anger. The boy is 23 years old. He is an idiot. All 23-year-olds are idiots. I was an idiot. You were definitely an idiot. Do not burn the house down just because the kid played with matches. I looked at the folder. Inside was the certificate for the revocable living trust I had established when Brandon was born. That money was not just numbers on a spreadsheet. It was the sale of my first house, the one I rehabbed with my own sweat, stripping lead paint and replacing rotted joists until my back felt like it was breaking. It was 40 years of putting 10% of every paycheck into a low-risk index fund, ignoring the urge to buy a new truck or take a vacation just so the compound interest could do its work. It was supposed to be his safety net, his down payment on a house, his seed money for a business. I leaned forward, the leather of the chair creaking under my weight. This is not about anger, Leonard, I said quietly. This is about respect. And it is about reality. You did not hear the speech. You did not read the email he sent me. He was very clear. He said Richard is the one who invested in his future. He said Richard is the one who made him a man. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. If Richard is the investor, then Richard should have the privilege of funding the asset. I am just a biological necessity. I am the past, and the past does not pay for the future. Leonard put his glasses back on and looked at me with those sharp lawyer eyes. He knew me. He knew I was stubborn, but he also knew I did not make decisions lightly. You want to dissolve the trust, he stated flatly. No, I corrected him. I do not want to dissolve it. I want to empty it. I want to transfer the entire principal, every single cent of the $150,000 out of Brandon Sterling's name. Today. Right now. Leonard picked up his pen and tapped it against the desk. He was looking for a loophole, a way to stall me. Tom, if we move this money, there are tax implications. There are forms. It is not just pushing a button. I do not care about the taxes, I said. I will pay whatever the IRS wants. Just move the money. I have the account number right here where I want it to go. I slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was the routing number for a blind charitable account I had set up years ago for anonymous donations, mostly small things for the local trade school. Leonard looked at the number, then back at me. He saw the resolve in my face. He knew the conversation about the money was over. He opened the file, uncapped his pen, and started filling out the transfer authorization forms. The scratching of the pen on the paper was the only sound in the room for a long minute. It sounded like a shovel hitting dirt. While he wrote, I looked out the window at the brick wall of the adjacent building. I had one more piece of business. The anger from the graduation had cooled into a hard, cold suspicion. I had spent my life in construction. I knew how to spot a load-bearing wall, and I knew how to spot a facade. Richard was all facade. Leonard, I said, turning back to him. There is one more thing. He looked up, pausing mid-signature. What else, Tom? You want to write him out of the will, too? That is already done in my head, I said. But this is about Richard. Sterling and Finch. That is the name of his firm, or his fund, or whatever he calls it. Leonard nodded slowly. I have heard the name. Flashy. They do a lot of aggressive marketing. I want you to hire a private investigator, I said. A forensic accountant. Someone who knows how to dig through shell companies and offshore nonsense. I want to know everything about Richard. I want to know where his money actually comes from. I want to know if he actually owns that house Diane is living in, or if the bank does. I want to know if this job he gave Brandon is real. Leonard frowned, putting the pen down. Why, Tom? You are out. You just cut ties. Why do you care what Richard does? Let them play in their sandbox. I shook my head. It is not about caring. It is about knowing. I stood next to that man in the parking lot yesterday. He was sweating through a silk suit. He talked big, but his eyes were shifting. I have seen that look before. I saw it on a developer in '98 who tried to pay me with a post-dated check right before he skipped town. Richard smells like ozone Leonard. He smells like a wire that is about to short-circuit and burn the whole house down. Leonard leaned back, interlacing his fingers. You think he is a fraud? I think a man who has to tell you how rich he is every 5 minutes is usually broke, I said. And Brandon just bet his entire life on him. I want to know when the crash is coming, not so I can stop it, but so I am not standing under the falling debris when it happens. Leonard studied my face for a long moment. He saw the technician in me, the man who spent 40 years troubleshooting systems. He nodded. All right, he said. I know a guy. Ex-FBI specializes in white-collar fraud. He is expensive. Pay him, I said. Use the money from my personal savings, not the trust. I want a full dossier. Assets, liabilities, lawsuits, credit rating, everything. Leonard made a note on his legal pad. Then he turned the transfer document around and pushed it toward me. It was the death warrant for Brandon's safety net. The line for the signature was waiting. "You sign this, Tom, and there is no undo button," Leonard warned one last time. "You are taking away the only thing that protects him from the real world. If this job with Richard falls through, if he stumbles, he has nothing. You are removing the safety rail." I picked up the pen. It felt heavy in my hand, heavier than a sledgehammer. I thought about Brandon's face on that stage. I thought about the arrogance. I thought about the way he looked at my truck with disgust. He thought he was flying. He thought he was above the laws of gravity because Richard told him he was. He needed to learn that gravity always wins. I signed my name, Thomas Sterling. The ink was black and permanent. I pushed the paper back to Leonard. "I know what I am doing, Leonard," I said, my voice devoid of doubt. "I am not hurting him. I am teaching him. He thinks investment is about suits and handshakes. He thinks it is about image." I stood up and buttoned my jacket. "I am teaching him the first and most important lesson of investment," I said, looking Leonard dead in the eye. "If you choose the wrong partner, you lose everything. Consider this his tuition for the school of reality." Leonard looked at the paper, then at me. He didn't say anything else. He just closed the folder. The sound was final, like a judge's gavel. I turned and walked out of the office, leaving the money and my son behind. The silence in my kitchen had a texture to it. It was thick and heavy like a wool blanket, but it was not uncomfortable. It had been exactly 30 days since the graduation, 30 days since I walked out of that auditorium, and 30 days since I had spoken a single word to my son. I sat at my small Formica table, the same table where I used to help Brandon with his math homework 20 years ago. My dinner was simple. A hamburger I had grilled myself on the back deck, sitting on a paper plate with a side of potato chips. There was no wine. There was no waiter hovering to refill my water glass. There was just me, the hum of the refrigerator, and the glow of my laptop screen. I had created a fake Facebook account a week ago. I used a generic name, John Smith, and a picture of a landscape I found on Google. It was not something I was proud of. Spying on your own child feels dirty, like looking through a keyhole you know you should not look through. But I was a father, and habits die hard. I needed to know if he was alive. I needed to know if the crash had happened yet. I clicked on his profile. It was public, of course. Brandon wanted the world to see him. The feed was a barrage of success, or at least the appearance of it. It was a carefully curated exhibition of a life that cost a fortune. There was a photo from 3 days ago. Brandon was sitting at a table with a white tablecloth holding a glass of amber liquid. The caption read, "Closing deals and opening doors. The view from the top is worth the climb." He tagged the restaurant. It was Le Bernardin in New York. I looked at the prices on their online menu. A tasting menu was $300 a person. I looked at my hamburger. It cost me maybe $4 to make. I scrolled down. There was a picture of his new office. It was corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over Boston Harbor. The water was blue, the sailboats were white specks in the distance. The caption said, "My new view. Grateful for the opportunity to lead at Sterling and Finch. Big things coming." It looked impressive. To anyone else, to his college friends, to his old professors, it looked like he had made it. He was the golden boy. But I looked closer. I zoomed in on the desk. It was empty. There were no papers, no files, no personal photos. Just a laptop and a phone. It looked like a stage set. It looked like a space that had been rented for an hour just to take the photo. Then I saw the post from yesterday. It was a close-up of his wrist. He was wearing a watch, a Rolex Submariner. The bezel was green. The caption was short. A welcome gift from Richard. He said a man is only as good as his time. Thank you for believing in me. I stopped chewing. I pushed my glasses up my nose and leaned in closer to the screen. I hit the zoom button until the image was pixelated. I have worked with metal my entire life. I know steel. I know gold. I know how things are put together. I know the difference between a machine-cut edge and a hand-finished one. I looked at the clasp of the watch. On a real Rolex, the crown logo on the clasp is distinct, sharp, raised with precision. The spacing is mathematically perfect. I looked at the one on Brandon's wrist. The crown was slightly off-center. The metal around the edges of the links looked too shiny, too reflective, lacking the brushed satin finish of high-grade 904L steel. It was subtle. Most people would never see it. But I saw it. It was a fake. It was a high-quality replica, probably costing a few $100s, meant to fool people from a distance. Just like Richard. I sat back in my chair and let out a short, dry laugh. It was perfect. Richard had given him a counterfeit watch to mark the start of his counterfeit career. Brandon was walking around wearing a lie on his wrist, thinking it was a symbol of his arrival. He was so desperate to be part of that world that he did not even realize he was being played. He was wearing costume jewelry and calling it a crown. I closed the laptop. I could not look at it anymore. The falseness of it made my stomach turn. I took my plate to the sink and washed it. The water was warm and soapy. It felt real. Earlier that day, I had spent 6 hours at Martha's house down the street. Martha is 82 years old, a widow who lives on a fixed income. A storm had blown through 2 days ago, and a large branch had come down on her back porch, smashing the railing and rotting out 2 of the support posts. She had called a contractor, and he had quoted her $4,000. She didn't have $4,000. I went over there with my tool belt and my truck. I spent the morning tearing out the rotted wood. I measured, I cut, I sanded. I replaced the posts with pressure-treated lumber. I rebuilt the railing, making sure it was sturdy enough to hold a truck. I sanded it down until it was smooth as glass. When I was done, Martha came out with a glass of lemonade and a plate of oatmeal cookies. She tried to press a check into my hand for $200. Her hands were shaking. I pushed the check back. "No, Martha," I had said. "You keep that. Buy some flowers for the garden." "But Thomas, the materials," she argued. "You worked all day. I had the wood left over from another job," I lied. "It was just gathering dust. You are doing me a favor by letting me use it." She hugged me then. She smelled like lavender and old paper. She held on to me tightly, and I felt her gratitude. It was heavy and real. It was worth more than any steak dinner in New York. It was worth more than any fake Rolex. That railing would stand for 20 years. It was something tangible. It was a contribution to the world. I dried my hands on a dish towel and looked out the kitchen window into the darkness of my backyard. I could see the outline of my shed where I kept my tools. That was my reality. Wood, metal, sweat, and kindness. Brandon's reality was filters, angles, and captions. He was building a house on sand, and the tide was coming in. I walked into the living room. On the small table by the front door lay a thick manila envelope. I had picked it up from my post office box on the way home from Martha's. There was no return address, just a stamp, and my name typed on a white label. It was the report from the private investigator Leonard had hired. I stood there looking at it. It sat there like an unexploded bomb. I knew what was inside. I knew it wasn't going to be good. If Richard was real, if his company was legitimate, the report would be thin. It would be a few pages of tax returns and property deeds. This envelope was an inch thick. It was heavy. I reached out and touched the paper. It felt cold. Inside that envelope was the demolition of my son's world. Inside were the details of the shell companies, the leveraged assets, the maxed-out credit lines. Inside was the proof that the man Brandon called Dad was nothing more than a grifter in a rented suit. I did not open it. Not yet. I was not ready to see the gory details tonight. I wanted to hold on to the peace of the day for just a little longer. I wanted to savor the feeling of the smooth wood of Martha's porch railing under my hand. I picked up the envelope and carried it to my bedroom. I placed it on the nightstand next to my alarm clock. It would be there in the morning. The truth wasn't going anywhere. Richard wasn't going anywhere, at least not until the handcuffs clicked. I turned off the lamp and lay down in the dark. I closed my eyes, but the image of that fake Rolex on Brandon's wrist burned behind my eyelids. He was so proud of it. He was so proud of the lie. "Sleep well, son," I whispered into the empty room. "Enjoy the view while you can. Because the eviction notice is sitting right here on my nightstand." The kitchen table was cold under my elbows. The single bulb in the overhead fixture cast a yellow, jaundiced light over the formica. It was a 60-watt bulb, old-school filament, the kind they do not make anymore because they are inefficient. I liked it because it was honest. It got hot. It burned energy. It gave light. It did not pretend to be anything else. I used my pocket knife, a buck knife I had carried since 1985, to slit the top of the manila envelope. The sound of the paper tearing was loud in the empty house. I slid the contents out. It was a thick stack of paper clipped together with heavy black binder clips. The smell of laser printer toner wafted up, dry and chemical. This was the autopsy report of a life that was still walking around. I started reading. I read slowly. I read every line, every footnote, every disclaimer. I treated it just like a set of electrical schematics for a skyscraper. You do not skim schematics. If you miss a detail in a schematic, people die. Buildings burn down. The first section was about the company, Sterling and Finch. The name sounded established. It sounded like old money, like mahogany boardrooms and handshakes at the yacht club. That was the point. The report stripped away the paint and showed the rot underneath. There was no Finch. There never had been. It was just a name Richard picked because it sounded good next to Sterling. And Sterling, well, that was my son's last name. He was using my son's name to sell legitimacy. The registered address for Sterling and Finch was not the high-rise office with the harbor view that Brandon had posted on Instagram. It was a virtual office in a strip mall in Revere, sandwiched between a dry cleaner and a discount vape shop. It was a mail drop. The glamorous office where Brandon took his selfies was a co-working space. You could rent a desk for $40 an hour. You could rent a corner office for a day to impress a client. It was a stage set. It was Hollywood. I turned the page. The financials. This was where the investigator earned his fee. Richard was not a licensed broker. He was not a fiduciary. He had lost his license to sell insurance in 2008 for unethical practices. The report detailed the flow of money. It was simple, elegant, and illegal. It was a classic Ponzi scheme. He took money from new investors, deposited it into an operating account, and used it to pay out dividends to older investors to keep them happy and quiet. He skimmed 20% off the top for management fees. There was no investment strategy. There were no stocks, no bonds, no real estate. The money just sat there until it was needed to pay someone off, or to buy Richard a new suit. I flipped to the section on assets. The Porsche. The car Brandon had bragged about. The car Richard drove like he owned the road. It was leased. Not even a standard lease. It was a short-term rental from a luxury car share service. He rented it for weekends. He rented it for client meetings. He paid a premium to look like a millionaire for 3 hours at a time. Then I saw the house. Diane's house. The house I had left her. The house I had paid off before the divorce because I wanted my son to have a secure roof over his head. I looked at the title search. It was bleeding. There was a primary mortgage taken out 5 years ago. There was a second mortgage taken out 2 years ago, and there was a third lien, a high-interest private loan taken out 3 months ago. The equity was gone. It was less than zero. They were underwater. If the market dipped even half a percentage point, or if Richard missed one payment to the sharks he borrowed from the bank, would take the keys. Diane was sleeping in a house she did not own anymore. She was sleeping inside a foreclosure waiting to happen. My stomach churned. I felt a physical nausea, the kind you get when you smell burning insulation and know a fire is smoldering behind a wall. I turned to the last section. The personnel file. Brandon Sterling. This was the part I had been dreading. I wanted to see that he was just a secretary. I wanted to see that he was making copies and getting coffee. But it was worse. Job title: Junior Investment Associate. Duties: Client acquisition. The investigator had attached copies of emails and promotional flyers. Brandon was not analyzing markets. He was not looking at spreadsheets. He was a shill. He was the bait. Richard was using him to recruit. Brandon was reaching out to his college friends, the ones with wealthy parents. He was reaching out to his old professors. He was telling them about this exclusive opportunity with his brilliant stepfather. I read an email Brandon had sent to a fraternity brother. "Trust me, Mike," he wrote. "Richard is a genius. We are seeing returns of 15% month over month. I put my own signing bonus back into the fund because I believe in it so much. Get in now before we close the round." My son. My son was bringing lambs to the slaughter. I put the paper down. My hand was shaking. I wondered if he knew. Did he know it was a lie? Or was he so blinded by the flash, so desperate to be part of the club, that he did not ask questions? I looked at the numbers again. 15% month over month. Anyone who has passed high school math knows that is impossible. Anyone with an ounce of common sense knows that is a scam. But Brandon did not have common sense. He had ambition, and ambition without experience is a dangerous thing. He was either a criminal co-conspirator or a useful idiot. I prayed he was just an idiot. I sat there, in the silence. The refrigerator hummed. A car drove by outside its headlights, sweeping across the kitchen wall. I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over the screen. I should call him. I should call Diane. I should drive over there right now, kick down the door, and throw these papers in their faces. I should scream at them to get out, to sell the car, to return the money, to run before the FBI knocked on the door. It was the instinct of a father. It was the instinct of a protector. You see a wire sparking, you cut the power. You do not wait for the fire. I opened the keypad. I started to dial Brandon's number. I knew it by heart. Then I stopped. I remembered the email. The words floated in front of my eyes, glowing in the darkness of my memory. "Do not contact me until you know how to behave like a gentleman." He had drawn the line. He had built the wall. He had told me explicitly that he did not want my help, my advice, or my presence. He had chosen Richard. He had chosen the lie because the lie felt better than the truth. If I called him now, if I showed him this, he would not believe me. He would say I was jealous. He would say I was trying to sabotage him. He would say I was forging documents because I was a bitter old man who could not stand to see him succeed. He would hate me for destroying his dream, even if the dream was a nightmare. I slowly lowered the phone. I placed it face down on the table. You cannot save a man who is falling if he thinks he is flying. You have to wait until he hits the ground. I stood up and walked to the cabinet above the sink. I reached way to the back behind the box of cornstarch and the bottle of soy sauce that expired in 2012. My fingers brushed against a crinkled, soft pack. I pulled it out. Marlboro Reds. I had quit smoking 10 years ago when the doctor told me my blood pressure was creeping up. I had kept this pack for an emergency, a real emergency, like a nuclear war or an earthquake. I figured this counted. I tapped the pack against my palm. I pulled out a cigarette. It was stale and dry. I put it between my lips. I struck a match from the box by the stove. The sulfur flared a sharp, biting smell. I held the flame to the tobacco and inhaled. The smoke hit my lungs like a hammer. I coughed a deep, hacking cough that rattled my chest. But then the nicotine hit my blood. I felt my shoulders drop an inch. I felt the buzzing in my head slow down. I sat back down at the table, the smoke curling up into the yellow light. I looked at the dossier one last time. It was a tragedy written in numbers. It was a train wreck in slow motion. I took another drag. The ash glowed bright orange. "Okay," I said to the empty room. My voice was raspy from the smoke. "Okay." I closed the folder. I lined up the edges perfectly with the edge of the table. "If this is the world you want, Brandon, you can have it. You want to learn from Richard. Fine. Learn from him. Learn what happens when you build a life on theft and lies." I watched the smoke drift toward the ceiling fan. "Let it burn," I whispered. "Let it all burn down. I will be here with the broom when it is over. But I am not running into the fire this time." I sat there and smoked the cigarette down to the filter, watching the ash grow long and gray, just waiting for it to fall. The coffee at Joe's Diner on 4th Street always tasted a little like burnt rubber, but it was hot and it was cheap. I sat in my usual booth, the vinyl cracked and taped over with silver duct tape, nursing a black mug and watching the steam rise. It was a Tuesday morning 3 months after I had smoked that stale cigarette in my kitchen. Outside the window, the Boston rain was coming down in sheets, washing the grit off the sidewalks. But inside it was warm and smelled of bacon grease and old men. I had a job lined up for 10 o'clock rewiring a breaker panel in an old Victorian in Dorchester, so I was taking my time letting the caffeine wake up my joints. The television mounted in the corner above the pie case was usually tuned to the Weather Channel or sports highlights. I mostly ignored it, just background noise to the clatter of silverware. But then the sound changed. The low drone of the weather forecast cut out, replaced by the urgent staccato beat of breaking news music. The volume went up slightly as the waitress Deb stopped wiping the counter and looked up. I looked up too. Breaking news flashed across the bottom of the screen in aggressive red letters. The scene was chaotic. A shaky camera shot from a helicopter looking down at a familiar street in the financial district. I recognized the building. It was the high-rise where Brandon claimed to have his corner office, the CO working space that Richard used as a stage set. The camera zoomed in. Police cruisers and black SUVs were blocking the street. Men and women in blue windbreakers with yellow letters on the back were swarming the entrance. FBI, SEC. I put my mug down slowly. My hand was steady, but my heart gave a single hard thump against my ribs. It was happening. The wire had finally shorted out. The news anchor, a young woman with perfect hair and a serious face, started speaking. "Federal agents are currently raiding the offices of Sterling and Finch, an investment firm located in downtown Boston. Sources say the firm is at the center of a massive investigation involving securities fraud, wire fraud, and the operation of a Ponzi scheme estimated at over $5 million. $5 million. The number floated in the air. It was less than I expected, but enough to ruin 100 lives. Enough to put Richard away for 20 years. The camera cut to a ground-level view. A reporter was standing behind yellow police tape, shouting to be heard over the sirens. Behind him, the revolving doors of the lobby spun, and a group of agents marched out. In the middle of the phalanx was Richard. He was not wearing his suit jacket. His silk tie was loosened, hanging crookedly around his neck. His hands were behind his back, cuffed. He did not look like a master of the universe anymore. He looked small. He looked old. His face was gray, the color of wet cement, and he was sweating profusely, his expensive hair dye running down his temple. He was looking at the ground, trying to hide from the cameras, but there was nowhere to hide. An agent pushed his head down, guiding him into the back of a squad car like a common thief. I watched him disappear into the back seat. I felt nothing. No satisfaction. No joy. Just the cold confirmation of physics. What goes up on a lie must come down hard. Then the doors spun again. My breath hitched in my throat. Brandon walked out. He was not in handcuffs, but he was flanked by 2 officers. He looked like a child who had woken up in a burning house. His face was devoid of color, a mask of pure terror. His mouth was open slightly as if he was trying to ask a question no one would answer. He was wearing a suit, probably the one Richard had bought him, but it looked too big for him now, as if he had shrunk in the last hour. The camera zoomed in on him. He raised a hand to shield his face from the flashing lights of the press cameras. On his wrist, the fake Rolex glinted in the harsh TV lights. It shone brightly, a piece of polished glass and cheap steel pretending to be luxury. I stared at that watch. He had worn it so proudly. He had flashed it on Instagram as a symbol of his arrival. Now it was just evidence. It was a symbol of his gullibility. The reporter continued his breathless narration. We are told that other employees are being detained for questioning. Assets are being seized as we speak. The camera panned to the curb. A flatbed tow truck was backing up. The operator was hooking chains to the undercarriage of a silver BMW. Brandon's BMW. The company car. The car he had posted about saying, "Hard work pays off." I watched Brandon stop on the sidewalk. He saw the tow truck. I saw his shoulders slump. I saw the realization hit him like a physical blow. That car was not his. The apartment he lived in was not his. The job was not his. Even the watch on his wrist was a lie. He stood there in the rain, the water soaking his suit, his hair plastered to his forehead, watching his symbol of success being dragged up the ramp of a tow truck. An officer said something to him and touched his elbow. Brandon jumped. He looked around wildly, scanning the crowd of onlookers. For a second, he looked right into the news camera. His eyes were wide, wet, and desperate. He looked lost. He looked like he was searching for someone to step in and fix it, someone to tell the police there had been a mistake. He was looking for a father. But Richard was in the back of a cruiser, and I was sitting in a diner 3 miles away with a cold cup of coffee. I watched him get led toward a different car, an unmarked sedan. He got in the back seat, not as a criminal maybe, but as a witness, a pawn, a fool, who had been holding the bag when the cops kicked down the door. Deb the waitress shook her head and poured more coffee into the cup of the man next to me. "Look at that," she said, clicking her tongue. "Scammers, stealing from people's retirements. I hope they rot. That kid looks like he's barely out of diapers. Probably in on it too." I didn't say anything. I didn't say that's my son. I didn't say he isn't a criminal, he's just stupid. I just stared at the screen until the feed cut back to the anchor in the studio. The show was over. The curtain had fallen. I looked down at my hands. They were covered in small nicks and scratches from yesterday's work. They were real. The coffee mug was real. The table was real. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a $5 bill. I placed it on the table under the salt shaker. I stood up and buttoned my canvas work jacket. I did not feel vindicated. I did not feel like cheering. I felt a heavy aching sadness in the center of my chest. That was my boy on that screen. That was the kid I taught to ride a bike. Seeing him broken, seeing him humiliated, it didn't taste like victory. It tasted like ash, but I could not fix it. I could not run down there and bail him out. If I did, he would never learn. He would think there is always a safety net. He would think consequences are for other people. He had to sit in that police station. He had to answer the questions. He had to walk home in the rain because his car was gone and his accounts were frozen. He had to feel the cold reality of the pavement under his feet. I walked to the door of the diner. The bell jingled a cheerful sound that felt out of place. I stepped out into the rain. It was cold and raw. I pulled my collar up. I had a job to do in Dorchester. A breaker panel that kept tripping. A family that needed their lights to work. I got into my truck and turned the key. The engine rumbled steady and reliable. I put it in gear and pulled out into traffic. I didn't look back at the TV. I drove toward the job, toward the work, toward the only thing that never lies to you. The world was falling apart for Brandon Sterling, but Thomas Sterling had work to do. The sound of expensive plastic wheels dragging across concrete is distinct. It is a hollow, scraping sound that echoes humiliation. That was the sound Brandon made as he stood on the sidewalk outside the glass doors of the Meridian luxury apartments. He had 2 Louis Vuitton suitcases, or at least knockoffs that Richard had bought him, standing like tombstones on the wet pavement. It was raining again in Boston, a cold, miserable drizzle that soaked into his suit and made his hair plaster to his forehead. He wasn't waiting for a valet. He wasn't waiting for a town car. He was waiting for nothing, because he had nowhere to go. 10 minutes ago, the concierge, a man named Gary, who Brandon had tipped $20 just last week to impress a date, had blocked his path to the elevators. Gary didn't smile. He didn't open the door. He just handed Brandon a white envelope and pointed to his bags, which were already sitting in the lobby. The management had been polite but ruthless. The rent hadn't been paid in 3 months, not a single dime. Richard had set up the lease. Richard had promised the checks were on autopay. Richard had lied. The lease was in Brandon's name, but the bank account attached to it was empty. Eviction in a luxury building happens fast and quiet. They change the codes. They pack your bags. They escort you out. Brandon stood there shivering. He pulled out his phone. His fingers were shaking so bad he almost dropped it. He opened his banking app. He tried to transfer money to his debit card to get a hotel room. A simple Holiday Inn. Anything dry. Account frozen. Contact your financial institution. He tried his credit card. The platinum one Richard had helped him apply for. Card suspended. He was 23 years old. He was a valedictorian, and he had exactly $42 in his wallet and a negative net worth. He tried to call his mother. Diane answered on the first ring, but she was screaming before he could even say hello. She wasn't screaming at him, she was screaming at the universe. A process server had just taped a foreclosure notice to the front door of the house in the suburbs. The bank was calling in the loans, all of them. The house was leveraged to the hilt. She was crying hysterical, asking Brandon where Richard hid the emergency cash. She was asking her son to fix it. She was drowning, and she was trying to climb on top of him to breathe. Brandon hung up. He couldn't help her. He couldn't even buy a sandwich. He stood there for 5 minutes, staring at the gray sky. He ran through his list of friends. The fraternity brothers he had bragged to. The professors he had impressed. He couldn't call them. He couldn't let them see him like this. The shame was a physical weight heavier than the suitcases. He had played the part of the prince so well that he didn't know how to be a pauper. There was only one number left. One number he had sworn he wouldn't call. One number he had blocked and deleted, but knew by heart anyway. He stared at the keypad. He swallowed his pride, or at least he swallowed the lump in his throat. He told himself it was just a loan, just a temporary fix, a business transaction. 7 miles away, I was on my knees in a crawl space under a triple-decker in Southie. The air down there was thick with the smell of damp earth, old insulation, and the sharp tang of hot copper. I was sweating through my shirt, my safety glasses fogging up. I was brazing a new joint onto a water main that had sprung a leak and flooded the basement. It was dirty, back-breaking work. It was the kind of work Brandon despised. The blue flame of my torch roared in the darkness, illuminating the spiderwebs in the joists above me. I watched the silver solder melt and flow into the joint, sealing it tight. Perfect, solid, real. My phone buzzed in my back pocket. I ignored it. I finished the weld, turned off the gas, and flipped up my welding goggles. I wiped the sweat from my eyes with a rag that was more grease than cotton. The phone buzzed again. Persistent. I pulled it out. The screen glowed in the gloom. Incoming call. Brandon. I stared at the name. My thumb hovered over the red button. I should send it to voicemail. I should let him figure it out. But I am a father. And even when you cut the cord, the phantom limb still aches. I slid my thumb across the green button. I didn't say anything. I just held the phone to my ear and listened to the sound of rain and traffic on the other end. Dad. The voice was small. It cracked on the single syllable. It wasn't the voice of the arrogant executive from the email. It was the voice of a kid who scraped his knee. Dad. Are you there? I took a breath. The air tasted of dust. I am here, I said. My voice was flat, devoid of warmth. What do you want? There was a pause. I could hear him shivering. Dad, look, I am in a bit of a jam. It is a misunderstanding, really. A clerical error. The firm, Richard's accounts are temporarily locked up because of this investigation thing. It is all standard procedure, just a compliance check, but it messed up my direct deposit. I closed my eyes. He was still doing it. He was standing in the rain, homeless and broke, and he was still spinning the lie. He still believed Richard was a titan of industry who just had a bad day. He couldn't admit the truth. He couldn't say the words. Dad, I just need a bridge loan. He continued, his voice rushing now, gaining a frantic speed. Just to get me through the week until the lawyers clear this up. I found a new place, a nice apartment, but they need a deposit, and first month's rent today. It is $5,000. If you could just wire it to me, I will pay you back with interest as soon as Richard gets out. I promise. I will give you double. $5,000. He asked for it like he was asking for a glass of water. He wanted me to pay for another luxury apartment while he waited for a con man to get out of jail. He wanted my sweat money to fund his delusion. I looked at the copper pipe I had just fixed. It was strong. It would hold pressure. It did its job. You have the wrong number, I said. The words came out calm, but they felt like stones in my mouth. What? No, Dad. It is me, Brandon. Please, I am standing on the street. It is raining. You have the wrong number, I repeated louder this time. You are looking for an investor. You are looking for the man who secured your future. You are looking for your real father. Dad, please don't do this. Richard is detained right now. I can't call him. Richard is in the county lockup. Brandon, I said. He is wearing an orange jumpsuit. He isn't detained. He is arrested. He stole $5 million. He stole your mother's house. He stole your future. And you still want to wait for him. You still want to pay me back with his money. Silence on the line. Just the sound of cars hissing by on wet pavement. You want investment advice, I asked. Here is some free advice. Call Richard. Call the man who made you who you are. Ask him to teach you how to invest in cigarettes. I hear the margins in the prison commissary are fantastic. Dad. I pulled the phone away from my ear. His cry was desperate, a high-pitched plea of a child realizing the nightlight has burned out. Click. I ended the call. The silence of the basement rushed back in heavy and suffocating. I stared at the phone in my hand. My hand was shaking. A fine tremor ran through my fingers, rattling the heavy device. It wasn't fear. It wasn't joy. It was the adrenaline of amputation. I had just cut off my own limb to save the body. I sat there in the dirt for a long time. I thought about him standing in the rain. I thought about the $220,000 I had spent to put him in that suit. I thought about the trust fund that was now paying for welding masks and textbooks for kids I didn't know. I put the phone back in my pocket. I picked up my tools. I packed my torch, my solder, my flux. I stood up, my knees cracking in the damp cold. I didn't block his number again. I didn't need to. He wouldn't call back. Not today. He had to hit the bottom first. He was still falling. And you can't catch a falling man without breaking your own arms. You have to let him land. I climbed the stairs out of the basement, leaving the darkness behind, walking up toward the light of the kitchen, where the homeowner was waiting to pay me. I had earned my money today. Brandon was just starting to learn what that word actually meant. The rain was hitting the roof of my bungalow like 1,000 tiny hammers trying to break in. It was a nor'easter, the kind that blows in cold and angry off the Atlantic, stripping the last of the leaves from the trees and turning the streets of Boston into rivers of gray sludge. I was sitting in my living room in the wingback chair that I had reupholstered myself 10 years ago. A book on electrical theory lay open on my lap, but I wasn't reading. I was listening to the wind howl and thinking about copper piping. It is easier to think about copper than it is to think about your son sleeping under a bridge. Then the banging started. It wasn't a polite knock. It wasn't a visitor. It was a frantic, desperate pounding on the solid oak door I had hung back in '95. Thud, thud, thud. Someone was trying to beat the wood into submission. I didn't jump. I didn't rush. I marked my page with a strip of leather and placed the book on the side table. I stood up, my knees popping in the damp cold, and walked slowly to the foyer. I flipped the porch light switch. Through the frosted glass panel, I saw two dark, huddled shapes shivering violently against the storm. I unlocked the deadbolt and turned the handle. The wind caught the door and ripped it from my grip, slamming it against the interior wall with a crash that shook the house. The rain blew in cold and biting, soaking the entryway rug in seconds. Standing there were Diane and Brandon. They looked like ghosts that had been dragged through a sewer. Diane, the woman who once told me she wouldn't be caught dead in anything less than silk, was wearing a trench coat that was soaked through to the lining. Her hair, usually a helmet of expensive blonde highlights, and hairspray, was plastered to her skull, mascara running down her cheeks in black, oily rivulets. She was shaking so hard her teeth were audibly chattering. And Brandon, my boy. He was standing behind her, holding the handle of a suitcase that was missing a wheel. He was wearing the same suit he had worn on the news, but now it was ruined. The fabric was dark with water, the pants mud-stained up to the knees. He looked small. He looked like a child who had lost his mother in a supermarket, except he was 23 years old and standing on the doorstep of the man he had disowned. They didn't wait to be invited. They surged forward, pushing past me into the warmth of the hallway, dripping water and mud onto the hardwood floors I had sanded and stained with my own hands. Diane spun around before I could even close the door against the wind. She didn't say hello. She didn't say sorry. She attacked. It was her defense mechanism. When she was scared, she bit. "What kind of man are you?" she shrieked. Her voice was shrill, cracking with hysteria. "What kind of father leaves his own son on the street in a storm like this? You knew he was being evicted. He called you, and you hung up on him. You monster!" She was trembling, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. Water dripped from her nose. She looked pathetic, but her eyes were full of the same old venom. She was blaming me. She was standing in my house uninvited, blaming me for the rain. I leaned back against the closed door and crossed my arms. I looked at the puddle expanding around her designer boots. I didn't feel anger. I felt a strange, cold distance. "Hello to you too, Diane," I said calmly. "You are dripping on my floor." She gasped, choking on her indignation. "The floor? You care about the floor? Our house is gone, Thomas. The bank came. They came with the sheriff. They gave us 20 minutes to pack. 20 minutes to pack 30 years of life. They changed the locks. We have nowhere to go. We are on the street and you are worried about your precious floor. I looked at Brandon. He hadn't said a word yet. He was staring at the floor, his shoulders hunched. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was shivering, his lips blue with cold. You had a house, I said to Diane. I gave you a house. It was paid for. It was free and clear. You and your genius husband managed to lose a paid-off house in 5 years. That takes talent. Don't you dare talk about Richard like that, she snapped, though her voice wavered. He is a victim in this too. He is innocent. It is a misunderstanding. The government is targeting him because he is too successful. I almost laughed. It would have been a bitter laugh. She was delusional. She was standing in the wreckage of her life, holding the match and blaming the fire department. Brandon stepped forward then. He put a hand on his mother's arm, trying to calm her down. He looked up at me. His eyes were red-rimmed and exhausted. He switched tactics. Diane was the hammer, but Brandon tried to be the velvet glove. He tried to play the role he thought would work. The prodigal son. Dad, please, he said, his voice soft and shaking. Mom is just upset. We are all upset. It has been a nightmare. Look at us, we are freezing. He took a step closer, opening his hands in a gesture of surrender. I know I said some things, he continued. I know I sent that email. I was wrong, Dad. I was stressed out. I was trying to impress people. But you know me. You know I didn't mean it. We are family. Blood is thicker than water, right? You always said that. You always said family sticks together no matter what. I watched him perform. It was a good performance. It was almost sincere. But I saw the flicker in his eyes. He was scanning the room. He wasn't looking for forgiveness. He was looking for a lifeline. We need help, Dad, he said, dropping his voice to a whisper. Real help. We need money. There it was. The hook. I know you still have the trust fund, Brandon said, the words rushing out now. The $150,000. I know you didn't spend it. You never spend money. You are the best saver I know. He tried to smile, a weak, ingratiating smile that made my stomach turn. We need that money, Dad. Not for cars or clothes. We need it for a lawyer. A real criminal defense attorney for Richard. The public defender is a joke. If we can get Richard out on bail, if we can get him a good legal team, he can fix this. He can explain everything to the SEC. He can get our assets unfrozen. He can get the house back. Diane nodded vigorously, her wet hair flopping. Yes, she insisted. It is an investment, Thomas. Think of it as a loan. Once Richard is cleared, he will pay you back double, triple. He just needs a fighting chance. You are sitting on that money doing nothing with it. It is Brandon's money anyway. It was meant for his future. Well, this is his future. Saving his father is his future. Saving his father. She called Richard his father. Standing in my hallway, dripping my rain onto my floor, asking for my sweat money, she called the man who robbed them his father. They truly believed it. They stood there wet and ruined, believing that I was their safety deposit box. They thought I was a static object, a tool that had been sitting on a shelf waiting for them to need me. They thought the money was still there, gathering dust, just waiting for Brandon to snap his fingers. They thought I was stupid. I felt a fire kindle in my chest, but I banked it down. I didn't let it show on my face. I needed them to understand. Yelling wouldn't work. They were deaf to yelling. I needed to show them the map of the world they were actually living in. I pushed off the doorframe and walked past them into the living room. I didn't offer them a towel. I didn't offer them tea. I walked to the center of the room and stood by my armchair. I pointed to the small three-legged wooden stool in the corner. It was a milking stool I had made when I was an apprentice. It was hard, small, and uncomfortable. "Sit," I said. Brandon looked at the stool, then at the comfortable sofa. "Sit on the stool, Brandon," I commanded. My voice wasn't loud, but it had the weight of iron. He hesitated, then walked over and sat down. His knees came up high. He looked ridiculous and small. Diane sat on the edge of the sofa, clutching her coat around her like armor. "You want to talk about the trust fund," I said, looking down at them. "You want to talk about investments. You want to talk about saving Richard." "Yes," Brandon said, hope lighting up his eyes. "Just until this blows over. It is the only way, Dad." I looked at him. I looked at the fake Rolex still strapped to his wrist, now fogged up with condensation from the rain. He was clinging to the Titanic while it was vertical in the water, asking me for a bucket to bail it out. "You think I am a bank?" I said. "You think I am a fallback plan? You think that because I love you, I will let you set yourself on fire to keep that con man warm?" I sat down in my armchair. I rested my elbows on the arms and steeped my fingers. "You are asking for $150,000, I said. "Do you know how many hours of labor that is? Do you know how many crawl spaces I crawled through? Do you know how many shocks I took?" "It is for the family," Diane interjected. "It is for Brandon." "It was for Brandon," I corrected her. Past tense. I leaned forward. The shadows from the lamp cast long lines across my face. "We are going to have a conversation," I said. "And for the first time in your life, Brandon, you are going to listen. You are not going to talk. You are not going to negotiate. You are going to listen. We are going to talk about the price of admission to the real world. Because you seem to think the ticket is free. You seem to think you can insult the hand that feeds you and then ask it to wipe your mouth." I paused, letting the silence stretch, until the only sound was the rain hammering against the glass. "You want to know where the money is?" I asked softly. Brandon nodded, his eyes wide. "Good," I said, "because I am going to tell you. And when I tell you, you are going to understand exactly what it costs to betray a man who gave you everything." I reached down to the floor beside my chair, where I had placed the manila envelope earlier that evening. It was the same envelope I had opened in my kitchen months ago, the one that smelled of laser toner and betrayal. It had been sitting in my safe waiting for this exact moment. I did not throw it. I did not slam it. I simply leaned forward and slid it across the coffee table. It stopped right in front of Brandon's knees. The sound of the heavy paper sliding against the wood was a whisper that screamed. "You want to save Richard," I said, my voice steady. "You want to use my life savings to bail out the man who taught you how to be a gentleman. Before you ask me for another cent, you need to see exactly what you are investing in. Open it." Brandon looked at the envelope like it was a loaded gun. He looked at me, then at his mother. Diane was hugging herself, rocking slightly, her eyes fixed on the floor. She did not want to look. She knew deep down in the places she tried to ignore that the truth was inside that packet. "Go ahead, Brandon," I urged him. "You are a businessman. You are an investment manager. You know the importance of due diligence. Read the prospectus." His hand shook as he reached out. He undid the clasp and pulled out the stack of papers. The top page was the summary of the investigation, but I told him to skip it. I told him to turn to the emails. The investigator had done a thorough job. He had retrieved deleted correspondence from a server Richard thought was secure. "Turn to the tab marked Internal Communication," I instructed. "Read the email dated June 12th. That was 2 weeks after your graduation." Brandon flipped the pages. The paper rustled loudly in the quiet room. He found the page. I watched his eyes scan the text. I saw the moment the words hit him. His face, already pale from the cold, turned a sickly translucent white. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Read it out loud," I said. He shook his head, tears welling up in his eyes. "Read it," I commanded. His voice was a croak barely audible over the rain. Subject: The Kid. 2. Legal. From Richard. The text says. He stopped. He could not finish. It says I continued for him reciting the words I had memorized in the darkness of my kitchen. It says, do not worry about the compliance audit. I have set up the offshore accounts in the kid's name. He is the signatory. If the SEC comes knocking, he is the fall guy. He signs whatever I put in front of him. He is arrogant, and he is desperate to please. He is the perfect patsy. Diane let out a gasp, a sharp intake of breath that sounded like she had been stabbed. No, she whispered. No. That is fake. You forged that, Thomas. Richard loves him. Richard treats him like a son. I ignored her. I kept my eyes locked on Brandon. Keep reading, son, I said. Look at the next attachment. It is a bank authorization form for a shell company in the Cayman Islands, whose signature is on the bottom line. Brandon flipped the page. He stared at the document. It was a copy of a wire transfer authorization for $200,000. At the bottom, in bold, looping ink, was his own signature. I remember this, Brandon stammered. He told me it was just a standard tax form for my bonus. He said it was routine. He said I was an officer of the company now, and I needed to sign for the operating expenses. You signed a confession, Brandon, I said brutally. You signed a document admitting that you control the funds that were stolen from retirees. Richard set it up so that when the handcuffs came out, they would fit your wrists just as well as his. He did not give you a job. He gave you a prison sentence. The paper slipped from Brandon's fingers and scattered on the floor. He put his head in his hands. His shoulders shook. The idol had fallen. The man he worshipped, the man he insulted me to praise, had looked at him and seen nothing but a useful idiot, a disposable shield. Diane stood up. She was vibrating with denial. She walked over to the table and swiped the papers away, as if getting rid of the evidence would change the reality. "Stop it, Thomas," she screamed. "You are enjoying this. You are twisting everything. Maybe he made some mistakes with the paperwork, but he did it to protect the family. He is under a lot of pressure. He loves us. He loves me. We are partners. We are a team." I looked at my ex-wife. I saw the fear behind the anger. She was terrified that her entire life was a lie. She was terrified that she had left a good man for a phantom. "He loves you," I repeated. "Is that what you think?" I reached into the envelope which was still on the table and pulled out the last section of the report. This was the part I had hesitated to show them. It felt cruel. But surgery is cruel. You have to cut to heal. I held up a sheet of paper. It was a credit card statement. "Look at this, Diane," I said. "Look at the charges. The 4 seasons in Miami, Cartier, Tiffany. The dates match the weekends he told you he was at investment conferences in New York." I tossed the paper onto the coffee table. Then I tossed a photograph on top of it. It was a grainy surveillance shot taken with a telephoto lens. It showed Richard on a balcony in Miami. He was wearing a bathrobe. Standing next to him with her hand on his chest was a woman who was definitely not Diane. She was young, maybe Brandon's age. She was laughing. "Her name is Vanessa," I said, my voice flat. "She is 24 years old. She is an aspiring model. And do you know where the money from your house refinance went, Diane? It didn't go into the market. It didn't go into stocks. It went into a condo in South Beach. It is in her name." Diane stared at the photo. Her eyes traced the lines of Richard's face, the smile she thought was reserved for her. She looked at the young woman. She looked at the date stamp in the corner of the photo. It was taken 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, while Diane was dodging calls from the bank, Richard was drinking mimosas with a girl young enough to be her daughter, spending the last of Diane's equity. The fight went out of her. It drained away like water from a broken glass. She sank back onto the sofa, not sitting, but collapsing. She made a sound, a low, keening wail that was pure heartbreak. It was the sound of a woman realizing she had sold her soul for fool's gold. Brandon lifted his head. He looked at his mother broken on the couch. He looked at the papers scattered on the floor, the evidence of his own stupidity. He looked at the photo of the woman who had replaced his mother. Then he looked at me. His eyes were red, swollen, and terrified. The arrogance was gone. The valedictorian was gone. All that was left was a scared kid who realized the monsters under the bed were real. "Dad," he choked out. The word sounded foreign in his mouth, but it was desperate. "Dad, I am so sorry. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. I was so stupid. I just wanted to be... I wanted to be like him." He slid off the stool and onto his knees. He crawled forward a few inches, reaching out toward me but not daring to touch me. "Please, Dad. You were right. You were right about everything. He used me. He destroyed us." He wiped his nose with the back of his hand, smearing dirt and tears across his face. "But you can fix it," he pleaded. "You are the only one who can fix it. We need that money. Not for Richard. Forget Richard. Let him rot. But for us. For Mom. For me. I need a lawyer, Dad. If those documents are real, I could go to jail. I need a defense attorney. I need to pay fines. I have nothing." He looked up at me, his eyes begging, pleading for the safety net he had cut down. "Can I have the trust fund, Dad? Please. Just give me the money. I will do whatever you want. I will work. I will pay you back. Just save me. I know you still have it. You always save it. You are my dad. You have to save me." The room was silent except for Diane's soft sobbing and the rain outside. Brandon knelt there waiting for the check. He was sorry, yes. He was terrified, yes. But he still didn't understand. He still thought the solution to his problem was my money. He thought an apology was a coin you put in a machine to get a bailout. He thought the trust fund was still his right. I looked at him, and for a moment I wanted to give it to him. I wanted to write the check and make the fear go away. That is what fathers do. But I knew that if I did that, I would be finishing the job Richard started. I would be teaching him that consequences are negotiable. I would be teaching him that he could burn down a house and someone else would always build him a new one. I stood up slowly. My knees cracked. I looked down at my son groveling on the floor of the house he had been too ashamed to visit for 4 years. "You want the trust fund?" I asked softly. "Yes." Brandon breathed, hope flooding his face. "Yes, please." I turned and walked to the antique secretary desk in the corner of the room. I opened the top drawer. I reached inside and pulled out a large, thick envelope. It was cream-colored heavy stock with a logo embossed in blue ink on the corner. I walked back to the center of the room. I held the envelope up so Brandon could see it. "This is the trust fund," I said. "Or at least this is what happened to it." Brandon scrambled to his feet, reaching for the envelope. He thought it was a bank draft. He thought it was salvation. I handed it to him. "Open it," I said. He tore it open. He pulled out the contents. It wasn't a check. It was a glossy brochure and a stack of letters. On the front of the brochure was a picture of a group of young men and women. They were wearing hard hats and safety glasses. They were holding welding torches and pipe wrenches. They were smiling, but their faces were dirty. They looked tired. They looked proud. The logo at the top read, Northeast Trade Scholarship Fund. Brandon looked at the brochure, then at me, a confusion clouding his face. "What is this?" he asked. I took a step closer to him. "You stood on that stage and you told 2,000 people that Richard was the one who invested in you," I said. "You said I was just a wallet. You said you didn't need my spare change." I pointed at the brochure in his hand. "So I listened to you, Brandon. I respected your wishes. I took the $150,000, every single penny of it, and I invested it. But I didn't invest it in you. I invested it in the future. I reached out and tapped the picture of the young students. That money funded full scholarships for 10 kids from the inner city. Kids who grew up without fathers. Kids who know the value of $1 because they have never had one they didn't earn. They are studying to be electricians, plumbers, welders, the people you think you are better than. Diane lifted her head, her eyes wide with horror. You gave it away, she whispered. You gave away our son's money to strangers. It wasn't his money, I snapped, my voice finally rising. It was my money. It was my blood. And I gave it to people who will honor it. I gave it to people who will use it to build something real, not to buy fake watches and rent fake lives. Brandon dropped the brochure. It fluttered to the floor, landing on top of the evidence of Richard's crimes. He looked at me with a look of total devastation. The hope was gone. The safety net was gone. He was falling, and there was nothing beneath him but the hard, cold ground. You really did it, he stammered. It is gone. It is all gone. It is not gone, I said. It is just in better hands. I walked to the front door and opened it. The wind howled, blowing rain into the hallway. Now, I said, looking at the two of them. Get out. The brochure lay on the floor between us, a splash of color against the dark wood, but Brandon was staring at it as if it were a warrant for his execution. He picked it up with trembling fingers, his eyes darting across the glossy paper, desperate to find a number, a balance, a bank account, anything that looked like salvation. But there were no routing numbers. There were no maturity dates. There were only faces. Faces of young men and women who looked nothing like the people he partied with in downtown Boston. These were faces smeared with grease, framed by safety helmets, eyes bright with a hunger that Brandon had never known because I had always fed him before he could feel it. I walked over to the desk and picked up the rest of the packet that had been inside the envelope. I held a stack of handwritten letters in my hand. They were written on notebook paper, some in pencil, some in cheap blue ink. They didn't have the letterhead of a law firm or a hedge fund. They smelled of graphite and gratitude. You remember your speech, Brandon? I asked, my voice filling the room, pushing back against the sound of the rain. You remember what you said into that microphone? You said Richard was the one who invested in you. You said he was the one who saw your value. You told the world that my contribution was irrelevant. You made it very clear that you respected capital, not labor. You respected the check writer, not the check earner. I took a step toward him. He flinched, pulling his knees up to his chest on the hard stool. So I did what any good investor does, I continued. I reallocated my assets. I moved my capital to a sector that showed promise. I moved it to people who understand that if you want lights, you have to wire the switch. I held out the first letter. Read this, I commanded. He didn't move. He couldn't. He was paralyzed by the dawning horror that the money wasn't just hidden, it was gone. I will read it for you, I said. It is from a kid named McGill. He is 19 years old. He has been raising his 2 little sisters because his mother works 3 jobs. He wanted to be a welder, but he couldn't afford the certification classes. He was going to drop out and work at a fast food joint to pay the rent. I looked down at the letter, my voice softening just a fraction, as I read the words that had healed a part of my heart 3 months ago. Dear Mr. Sterling, McGill wrote, I do not know who you are, but you saved my life. Because of this scholarship, I am top of my class. I just got hired as an apprentice at the shipyard. I can buy my sisters new coats for winter. I promise I will work until my hands bleed to make you proud. Thank you for believing in a nobody like me. I dropped the letter onto Brandon's lap. It landed lightly, but it hit him like a brick. $150,000, I said, saying the number slowly so they could feel the weight of it. That money was dispersed 3 months ago. It is gone, Brandon. It is not in a savings account. It is not in a bond. It is in tuition fees for McGill. It is in tools for a girl named Sarah who wants to be an electrician. It is in textbooks for a boy named David who wants to be a plumber. It is spent. Every single dime. Diane let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. She stood up from the sofa, her face twisted into a mask of pure, incredulous fury. The shock had worn off, replaced by the panicked realization that the life raft she thought was waiting for her had been burned to ashes. "You are insane," she shrieked, her voice bouncing off the walls. "You are absolutely out of your mind, Thomas. You gave away our money. You gave away $150,000 to strangers, to random people who mean nothing to us. You threw it in the trash just to spite us." She rushed toward me, grabbing the lapels of my work jacket, shaking me with a strength born of hysteria. "That was Brandon's money," she yelled, spit flying from her lips. "It was his birthright. It was family money. How could you give it to gutter trash when your own son is in trouble? You chose strangers over your own blood. You are sick. You are a sick, bitter old man." I grabbed her wrists. My grip was firm, forged by 50 years of bending steel conduit. I pulled her hands off my jacket and pushed her back. I didn't push her hard, just enough to create space enough to show her that she couldn't move me. "Strangers." I roared, my voice finally breaking the calm facade I had maintained all night. "You call them strangers." I snatched the stack of letters from the table and held them up, shaking them in her face. "These kids write to me every month. They send me their report cards. They send me pictures of their first welding beads. They tell me about their lives. They ask me for advice on how to handle a difficult foreman. And do you know what they call me?" I looked at Brandon, who was staring at the letters with a look of utter defeat. "They call me Uncle Tom," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "They treat me with more respect in a 3-paragraph letter than this boy, my own flesh and blood, has treated me in the last 10 years. They don't look at my boots and see dirt. They look at my boots and see the path to a future. They honor the work. They honor the man." I turned back to Diane, who was panting, her chest heaving. "You want to talk about family?" I asked. "Family isn't just DNA, Diane. Family is who shows up. Family is who holds the ladder while you climb. You and Brandon decided you were too good for this family. You decided you belonged to the family of Richard. Well, Richard is a thief, and now you are surprised that there is no honor among thieves." I looked down at Brandon. He had picked up Miguel's letter. He was reading it. I saw a tear drop onto the cheap notebook paper, blurring the ink. He wasn't crying for Miguel. He wasn't crying for the beauty of charity. He was crying because he finally understood the math. "The money is really gone, isn't it?" he whispered, his voice sounding hollowed out. "It is invested," I corrected him. "It is generating returns. Just not for you." He crumpled the letter in his fist, then smoothed it out again, as if he didn't know what to do with his hands. The realization was washing over him in waves. There was no lawyer. There was no bail. There was no restart button. The safety net he had spent his entire life ignoring, the one he assumed would always be there to catch him, had been moved. He was in freefall. "But Dad," he whimpered, looking up at me with the eyes of a terrified child. "What am I going to do? I have debt. I have the feds asking questions. I have nowhere to sleep." I looked at him. I saw the fear. It was real fear. It was the fear of a man who has suddenly realized that the world is cold and hard and doesn't care about his GPA. I walked over to him. I towered over him as he sat on that little milking stool. "You are going to do what every man has to do eventually," I said. "You are going to stop waiting to be rescued." The silence in the room was heavy with the echo of my ultimatum. Diane was still on the sofa, her face a mask of disbelief that was slowly curdling into pure, undiluted rage. She had expected a negotiation. She had expected that if she cried enough, if she played the family card hard enough, I would crack. I had always cracked before, But the man she knew, the man who was desperate for her approval, was gone. He had walked out of a graduation ceremony in Montreal and never come back. "Thomas," she hissed, standing up. Her voice was trembling, but this time not from cold. "You are serious. You are actually going to kick me out. After everything. We were married for 20 years. We have a son. And you are going to let me walk out into a storm with nothing." I walked to the front door and held it open. The wind was still howling, stripping the last dead leaves from the oak trees in the yard. The rain came down in sheets illuminated by the porch light. "We were married, Diane," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Past tense. "And then you left. You told me I wasn't enough. You told me you wanted a life of luxury. Well, you got it. You got the big house, you got the fancy husband, and now you have the consequences." I pointed into the darkness. "This house is not a shelter for people who hate me. It is not a hotel for people who only visit when they are broke. It is my home. And you are not welcome here. You made your choice 15 years ago. Tonight, you are just living with it." She stared at me, her mouth working, as if she wanted to spit poison, but she had nothing left. She looked at Brandon, who was still sitting on the milking stool, staring at the floor, the steel-toe boots resting heavy on his lap. "Brandon, are you coming?" she demanded. "We are leaving. We will find a hotel. We will find someone who actually cares about family." Brandon didn't move. He didn't look up. He just sat there, his hands gripping the worn leather of the boots. He knew there was no hotel. He knew there was no money. He knew that walking out that door with his mother meant walking into an abyss he wasn't strong enough to survive. "Brandon," she shrieked, "get up! Do not let him humiliate you like this. He is trying to break you. He is jealous. He is jealous of Richard. He is jealous of your success." Brandon raised his head slowly. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. "What success, Mom?" he whispered. "The success that got me evicted. The success that has the FBI looking for me. There is no success. There is just this." He looked down at the boots again. Diane made a sound of disgust. She pulled her wet trench coat tighter around herself. "Fine," she spat. "Stay here. Let him turn you into a laborer. Let him drag you down to his level. But don't come crying to me when you realize you threw away your potential." She marched past me, her heels clicking angrily on the hardwood. She stopped at the threshold and looked back at me one last time. Her eyes were full of hate, but beneath it I saw the terror. She was 50 years old, broke, homeless, and alone. "I hope you rot, Thomas," she said. "I hope you die alone in this sad little house with your money and your self-righteousness." I watched her walk down the steps and into the rain. She stumbled once, nearly falling in the mud, but she caught herself and kept going, disappearing into the dark toward her car that probably wouldn't start or was about to be repossessed. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel pity. I just felt clean. I closed the door. The sound of the latch clicking shut was the most final sound in the world. I locked the deadbolt. I turned back to the room. It was just me and Brandon now. The air was quieter but heavier. He was still sitting on the stool, hunched over the boots, as if they were an anchor holding him to the floor. I walked past him to the hall closet again. I rummaged around in the back and pulled out a bundle of clothes. It was a pair of Carhartt work pants, double-kneed, stained with grease and paint, and a high-visibility orange hoodie that smelled of sawdust. They were my old spares, but they would fit him. We were the same build even if he had never used his muscles for anything heavier than lifting a latte. I walked back and dropped the clothes onto the coffee table. "Put these on," I said. "Your suit is ruined, and you can't work in silk." Brandon looked at the orange fabric. It was bright, garish, the uniform of the invisible men who fix the roads and build the bridges. He looked at it with a mixture of horror and resignation. "Dad," he said, his voice trembling, "I can't do this. I really can't. I am a valedictorian. I graduated summa cum laude from McGill. I wrote my thesis on macroeconomic trends in developing nations. I am not a digger." I sat down in my armchair, leaning forward, resting my elbows on my knees. I looked him dead in the eye. "Let me tell you about economics, Brandon," I said. "The real kind. Not the kind in textbooks. In the real world, your value is determined by what you can produce. Right now, your macroeconomic thesis is worth 0. Your degree is worth 0. Your resume is radioactive. You have no assets. You have massive liabilities. You are insolvent." I pointed at the boots in his lap. "But those boots," I said, "those boots have value. If you put them on, you become labor. You become a resource. Mike needs labor. He needs someone to move dirt from point A to point B. He doesn't care about your GPA. He doesn't care about your thesis. He cares if the trench gets dug before the inspector arrives." Brandon wiped a tear from his cheek, leaving a smudge of dirt. $18 an hour, he whispered. That is minimum wage. I was making 6 figures. You were making 0 figures, I corrected him. You were making monopoly money. You were laundering stolen cash. $18 an hour is real. It buys bread. It pays rent. It is honest. And right now, honest is the only currency you have left. I leaned back. Here is the deal, I said. You sleep on the couch tonight. Tomorrow morning at 5:30, I wake you up. We drink coffee. We drive to the site. You work a 10-hour shift. You do what Mike tells you. You don't complain. You don't brag. You don't talk about McGill. You just work. I paused. If you quit, if you walk off the job, if you complain to me that it is too hard, you are out. Permanently. I will change the locks. I will block your number, and you can go find your mother and live under a bridge together. Brandon looked at me. He was searching for a crack in my armor, a hint of the soft father who used to sneak him extra dessert. But that father wasn't there. That father had been replaced by a foreman. He looked down at the boots. His hands were shaking violently now. He started to unlace his dress shoes. The expensive leather was waterlogged and ruined. He pulled them off and set them aside. They looked like artifacts from a lost civilization. He picked up the left work boot. He slid his foot inside. It was stiff cold and heavy. He laced it up his fingers, fumbling with the thick laces. He tied it tight. Then he did the right one. He stood up. He clomped on the hardwood floor, the heavy rubber soles making a dull, authoritative sound. He picked up the orange hoodie and pulled it over his head. It swallowed him. He looked ridiculous. He looked like a child playing dress-up in a giant's clothes. But he was standing. He looked at me, his eyes wet, his chin trembling. I will try, Dad, he choked out. You won't try, I said, standing up to meet his gaze. You will do. Trying is for people who have options. You don't have options. You have a shovel. I walked to the kitchen and turned off the light. Get some sleep, I said over my shoulder. The alarm goes off at 5:30. And Brandon. He looked up, a bright orange figure in the shadows. Yeah, don't be late for breakfast. Mike hates people who are late. I walked to my bedroom and closed the door. I didn't lock it. I didn't need to. He wasn't going anywhere. He had just put on the chains of his salvation. The gravel crunching under the tires of my Ford F-150 was a familiar sound, the music of my entire adult life. It was a year later, almost to the day, since I had dropped a pair of steel-toe boots on my living room floor and told my son to choose between them and the street. I pulled the truck onto the shoulder of a massive construction site in Quincy, just south of Boston. They were building a new distribution center, a sprawling skeleton of steel beams and concrete that rose out of the mud like a modern cathedral. It was noon. The whistles had blown. The roar of the excavators and the jackhammers had died down to a low idle. It was lunchtime. I rolled down the window. The air smelled of diesel fumes, wet concrete, and sawdust. To me, it smelled like money. Honest money. I scanned the site, looking past the heavy machinery and the stacks of rebar. I wasn't looking for the foreman. I wasn't looking for the architects with their clean white hard hats and rolled-up blueprints. I was looking for the grunts, the guys in the trenches, the guys who go home with dirt under their fingernails that no amount of scrubbing can ever fully remove. I saw a group of them sitting on a stack of cinder blocks near the perimeter fence. They were laughing, passing around a thermos of coffee, eating out of battered metal lunchboxes. And there, sitting a little apart from the rest, was a young man. I put the truck in park and killed the engine, but I didn't get out. I just watched. He was wearing the orange hoodie I had given him, though now it was faded by the sun and stained dark with grease and sweat. The Carhartt pants were frayed at the hems. He had filled out. The suit jacket that had hung off him like a shroud a year ago wouldn't fit him now. His shoulders were broader, the muscles in his forearms cording, as he unwrapped a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. It wasn't a $300 tasting menu. It looked like bologna on white bread. He took a bite, chewing slowly, staring out at the steel structure he was helping to build. His face was tanned darker than I had ever seen it, and there was a smudge of black grease across his cheekbone. He didn't look like a valedictorian. He didn't look like an investment banker. He looked like a man. A heavy hand slapped the doorframe of my truck. I looked up to see Mike, the site foreman, grinning at me through the open window. Mike was a bear of a man, 60 years old, with a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite. I had taught him how to bend conduit back in '85. "Tom," he rumbled, his voice gravelly. "I thought I recognized this rust bucket. Checking up on your investment." I nodded toward the kid on the cinder blocks. "How is he doing, Mike?" "Give it to me straight." "Did he break?" Mike laughed, a short, sharp bark. "He almost did," Mike admitted, leaning his elbows on the windowsill. "The first month was hell, Tom. I am not going to lie to you. He threw up twice the first week from the heat. He blistered his hands so bad he had to tape them up just to hold a shovel. He cried in the port a potty. I heard him. He called me every name in the book under his breath. I gripped the steering wheel. It was hard to hear, but I needed to hear it. And then I asked. And then Mike said, spitting on the ground, he stopped crying. Around month 3, something clicked. We were pulling a main feeder line through a flooded trench. It was raining cold as hell. Everyone was miserable. The cable got stuck. Brandon didn't wait for orders. He jumped into the mud, waist deep, and freed the snag. He didn't complain. He just did it. Since then, he is the first one here and the last one to leave. He listens. He learns. He is the best cable runner I have on the crew right now. Mike looked back at Brandon with genuine respect. He is a good kid, Tom. He is not soft anymore. You did good. Mike slapped the door again and walked back toward the trailer. I sat there for a moment, letting the words sink in. He jumped in the mud. He freed the snag. My son. The boy who thought he was too good for this world had finally decided to join it. I must have stayed there too long because Brandon looked up. He sensed eyes on him. That is an instinct you develop on a job site. You always know who is watching. He stopped chewing. He lowered his sandwich. He saw the truck. He saw me. For a second, I held my breath. I didn't know what he would do. Would he be angry? Would he be ashamed that I was seeing him like this, dirty and eating cheap meat? Would he run over and ask for money, thinking his penance was done? He didn't do any of those things. He stood up. He brushed the crumbs off his lap. He adjusted his hard hat. He stood tall, his spine straight, his chin up. He looked me right in the eye across the 50 yards of gravel that separated us. There was no begging in his gaze. There was no resentment. there was just recognition. It was the look of one worker acknowledging another. He nodded. Just once. A sharp downward motion of his chin. Hello, I am okay. I am doing it. I felt a lump rise in my throat, hot and tight. I didn't trust my voice to speak, even if he could hear me. I didn't open the door. I didn't go over there to hug him. We were past that. We were in a new place now, a place built on respect, not dependency. I lifted my hand from the steering wheel. I made a fist, extended my thumb, and gave him a thumbs up. Brandon smiled. It wasn't the slick, practiced smile he used to give Richard. It was a real smile, tired but genuine. He raised his hand and gave me a thumbs up back. Then he sat back down, picked up his sandwich, and went back to eating. His break wasn't over, and he had work to do. I put the truck in gear and rolled forward. I didn't look back in the mirror. I didn't need to. I knew he was there. I knew he was solid. As I drove away from the site, merging onto the highway back to Boston, I thought about the $150,000. It was a lot of money. It was a fortune to some. To Brandon a year ago, it was just a ticket to a party. He lost it all. He lost the trust fund. He lost the luxury apartment. He lost the BMW. He lost the fake Rolex. But as I drove, feeling the hum of the road, I realized he hadn't lost anything that mattered. He spent $150,000 to learn the hardest lesson a man can learn. He paid a high tuition to the school of hard knocks. But looking at his eyes today, looking at the way he sat on those bricks, I knew the return on investment was going to be infinite. I didn't leave him a trust fund. I didn't leave him a pile of cash that would run out the moment he stopped respecting it. I left him something better. I left him the ability to wake up in the morning, put on his boots, and build his own life with his own two hands. I left him the knowledge that no one is coming to save him, and that is okay because he can save himself. That is the real inheritance. That is the legacy of Thomas Sterling. And for the first time in a long time, as I drove toward the skyline of the city, we both built, I knew the name Sterling actually meant something again. If there is one thing I want you to take away from my story, it is this. We live in a world that is obsessed with the appearance of success. We filter our lives, we lease our luxury, and we worship the people who shout the loudest about how rich they are. But real value isn't found in a bank account or a job title. Real value is found in the struggle. It is found in the ability to stand up when the world knocks you down. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for the people you care about is to let them fall. You have to let them hit the bottom so they can find out what they are made of. It hurts. It is terrifying. But if you protect them from the rain, they will never know how to build a roof. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us share more stories like this one. Let me know in the comments if you have ever had to give someone some tough love, or if someone gave it to you. I would love to hear your story. Thanks for watching, and remember, the best view comes after the hardest climb.